It's just a delight to um, welcome you to tonight. It's the second program of our 2022-2023 Thought Leadership Series here at Lesley, where we hear and we learn from a robust and diverse range of inspirational thinkers, creators, visionaries, people who are at the cutting edge of important, caring, and creative fields that advance human potential and make positive, tangible differences in the lives of others. So, with that as our premise, it's really a thrill to introduce tonight's speaker, Lindsay Jones. Um, uh, I've been able to watch Lindsay's work personally for a while now. As you will soon find out, she's a force of nature and she's a force for good. She's done more with people, for people with learning differences than anyone I know, actually. She plays at on a national stage to really make policy changes, as she'll tell you about, that are really going to change the landscape. I first became acquainted with Lindsay when she was the chief executive officer of the National Center for Learning Disabilities. This is an advocacy organization that promotes innovation and research and a youth voice to improve the lives of people with learning differences and attention issues. I was on the board and I got to witness firsthand the impact she had on behalf of marginalized learners. Under her guidance, NCLD launched a young adult program. She organized parent advocates. She enacted a new strategic plan, and she built NCLD's national policy portfolio. Kind of exhausting, just that little list. As one very recent example, for several years, Lindsay has been championing the RISE Act, which stands for Respond, Innovate, Succeed, and Empower. And I'm pleased to announce that as part of the Mental Health Matters Act, the RISE Act passed in the US House of Representatives this fall. The purpose of the act is to make colleges and universities accessible to students with learning differences. I have to tell you, as a mother of a Threshold alum, Lesley's work has deeply impacted my family's life. Speaking of which, we're lucky to have Lindsay in an advisory role with our Threshold program. Am I making this go forward? Okay. Cool. All right, I'm moving over here. Our Threshold program is our 40-year-old program, which is designed to give students a college experience and a launch into a very full life of living and working and learning. It is perhaps no surprise that Lindsay has, for the past year, been applying her incredible skills to helping us think about the next 40 years of the Threshold program. She is widely recognized for her expertise in education and disability policy. She currently serves on the National Advisory Committee of the Science of Learning and Development Alliance, the Special Olympics National Education Leadership Network, the Senior Advisory Committee of the Progress Center. She frequently presents at conferences across the nation and frequently appears in print and on the air in media, including the Washington Post, US News and World Report, NPR, Education Week, and the National Journal. Again, a breathlessness. But tonight, she's here in our amphitheater, and I couldn't be more pleased to introduce Lindsay Jones.
Oh my goodness. Thank you. I feel like I can leave now, right? And you've seen most of my talk, so fill in. Just teasing. Thank you it is such an honor to be with you this evening. And I feel so lucky to have this opportunity at this time. I want to thank you so much, President Steinmeier, for your leadership and the leadership of the Lesley community. And had such an honor to meet with so many people personally today, and I'm so blown away and excited by the unique combination of skills and programs and expertise at Lesley, which I was more familiar with the Threshold program, but the arts and the design, and it's, I think, so powerful. And really, I just think it's given me so many ideas for ways we might be able to partner. And it's super unique. I think it's really cool, and I'm excited. Thank you for asking me to join. How many people are connected with Threshold? I'm just curious. Okay. I know, like, okay, great. The other question I have is, how many people have educators in their families? Oh, wow. Okay, great. Well, it's good to be among friends in both ways, right? I really want us to have a conversation tonight. So I know we have some opportunity at the end, but we're a great size to please like, if you have something that you want to ask or say, feel free to just speak out. I'd love to do that. I've joined CAST really recently as the CEO, and so I'm working on sort of some new thoughts and ideas. And so this is the first time I've given this talk, and so I feel really great actually about being able to give it to you and get your thoughts about it. I think it's also a really exciting time for our country in terms of where we are with inclusion. So I think a lot about inclusion in public schools, in private schools, how to create environments of belonging and how to design them. And I think after a long time doing this work, you can imagine why this is my next slide, right? I think nothing is truer than this. All things are difficult before they're easy. And that's part of it, right? It gets easy quick once we get it, but it's difficult to get there. Federal policy is like pushing a boulder up a hill. As Janet mentioned, that RISE Act passed the House. Now we've got to get to the Senate. And we introduced it 6 years ago. And it doesn't even cost a penny, not a penny. So it is a long person's game, but very, very worth it. So I want to talk a little bit tonight about sort of have a conversation with you in 3 areas. Family, which a lot of you are going to connect with, right? Law, maybe less, maybe everybody. We all connect to law in different ways, and design. But there's one takeaway, if you take nothing away from what we say here today, this statement: variability is the norm. I think I'm going to get this maybe not tattooed on my forehead, but maybe somewhere else, right? Variability is the norm. And I feel we've done so many things to try to explain that and push for that, but we aren't designing for it as well as we could, because I think we kind of are daunted by it. I don't know. But let's first talk about family. When you grow up, I'm an only child, and I think I had this experience of, my family was very important to me, and until I sort of saw outside of them, I thought everybody acted like my family, right? So I thought I would just kind of show you this photograph of basically my family. It's from my wedding many years ago. I know I look the same. Thank you. I would just say to you, I'm doing the work I'm doing today because of all of those people in that picture. Like 7 of them are teachers, 4 of them are special educators. And I just sort of grew up with that all around. They were constantly talking about individualization, IEPs, crafting education, right? Constantly. And I, probably like many of you, grew up in my mom's classroom, like before and after school, going into her classroom. She taught special ed led districts, became an author, all these, just really dedicated her life to this work. But when I was a kid, I would go in the morning to her classroom with her, right? And then I'd go to my school that was kind of near. She was in a public school. I was in a public school. It's a boundary issue thing where we lived. Didn't matter. But I would go there in the morning and hang out with all the kids in her classroom, then go to school, come back in the afternoon, hang out with all of them. And then there was I vividly remember where her classroom was in the building. It was down on the first floor of a 3-floor building and down a really long, dark hallway. And I didn't really think about it going there in the morning. And the lights were kind of buzzing. It was an old school. I didn't think about where it was located, where it was, who was in it. I thought about the kids in it who were fun. And there was a lot going on. And there was a lot of creativity. And her room was full of joy and laughter. And I didn't really think about the location or anything. I was like, it was 1981 or so. I was like 8 years old. It was just, until there was a day where the schedules didn't mix and my mom didn't have childcare. And so I went and she kind of had me shadow a teacher in a different classroom where like a friend's mom, right? And I spent the day with what was in a first grade classroom. And it was a shocking day because the entire school day, I never saw one of my friends from her classroom. I never saw my mom. I didn't see them at lunch. I didn't see them on the playground. I didn't see them in the hallway. And I thought, that's so weird. And it really struck me in such a strange way, like who wasn't in the classroom? Why weren't they there? I don't think I could process it at that point. I just sort of noticed it. And I really did notice it, that there was a strange thing happening because there was a lot of fun and a lot of good learning going on down the hall. And it felt separate and isolated and alone. And it was a very salient moment that I can remember. Like you have those memories from when you're a child, and I remember it like I'm living it again. Especially because it just didn't make sense at that time. But, right, I think what was really interesting was having someone like my mother and every member of my family to deeply discuss it with, right? And I had the luxury of kind of being able to talk about that and think about that. And I think about, even fast forward to today, the need for community and the need to come into the light and not be separate and hidden. And I think that is extremely important. And I know that my mother struggled with that in her life, and the way she and her fellow sort of advocates and educators dealt with it was they found community. And so she joined the professional association, the Council for Exceptional Children. And the thing I remember about this, I remember two things vividly. They would meet on Fridays at TGIF Fridays. And that was awesome because they had these like great potato skins with bacon on them. They were fabulous, right? And they would all be talking about how to design in their rooms and what that was going on. And I remember that. And then I remember at their state conference, and this is an organization that exists today, the Council for Exceptional Children. It's a membership association for special education educators across the nation and world. And at that time, it was really very active and a great place for community. But I remember this button maker. For the state conference, we made 1,000 buttons in my garage. I don't know if you've ever used one of these button makers, right? They're actually, at the time, I thought this is quite fun until I was like, so boring. This is so boring. But the buttons said those two words. Those are the buttons. One said normal and one said abnormal. And you had to go up to the CEC booth and choose the one you wanted. And so teachers went bananas with it, got super creative. Many wore both. Well, as a young child, I picked normal. I thought, oh my God, I'm very, when you're young, it's like before being abnormal is cool, right? But it was like, wow. And it was, my mother chose abnormal. I watched people do all these things with them. And then we took a very long car ride home and we got to talk about that. What do those words mean? And what does it mean to put it on you, to wear it? and and how do you choose? And I can just vividly remember that and kind of talking about that and thinking about that. And I think about it today too, a lot. I think about language a lot today, as I know that you do as well. Well, fast forward, I was done with education. I was like, I am not going into education. Everyone's in education. So I thought, for some reason, I thought, well, I'll go to law school. That'll be great. No, I loved law school, actually. I went to the University of Arizona. I was done with education. But that did bring me, I thought, and that brought me to the law, which is the second part of what I want to talk about tonight. I don't know if I mentioned this, but I repeatedly said I will never work in education. Never. And in fact, at that time, there weren't many education law courses even when I was in law school. There weren't clinics. There were a handful, but there weren't any like there are today. There are many more today. Well, I thought that until and I went to a law firm in Phoenix after law school. And I chose that firm for a whole bunch of reasons, summer internship. And then I figured out that they happened to represent every school district basically in Arizona. They had teams of attorneys working in these districts. And I learned that in a fateful elevator ride where I was standing there with a bunch of attorneys and I overheard their conversation. And one of them said, oh, I'm headed to a discipline hearing. Oh my God, I'm headed to a discipline hearing. And they think the kid may have a disability. I don't know what to do. And I make this stupid comment, well, you better do a manifestation determination. Because if they denied, if that was caused by the disability, you're gonna have to, do a behavior implementation plan. And then they might say FAPE is at risk. And it was over. It was like, you're going, how do you know that? What is that? And I thought, I don't actually know what I'm saying, right? Like, oh God, right? So I literally went that day to that hearing and I loved it. It was a meeting actually, but I loved it and I got really into it. And I ended up working in it every day and with schools and districts at a really interesting time in history because No Child Left Behind had just been passed and schools were grappling with how are we going to change to respond to this, which brings me to my next story, mainstreaming. So one of my first cases was a school district and there were parents in the district of a child with Down syndrome, a 5-year-old little girl, kindergarten class. And they wanted her fully mainstreamed. At that time, we were calling it in Arizona, mainstreaming, fully integrated in the whole school. So educators were like, we cannot do that. There's no way we can do that. I said, really, why? Why can't you do that? I got a lot of information about why we can't do that. Well, and interestingly, looking back, they were like, we're going to offer specials. She can be integrated at lunch, in art, that's it, nothing else. Why? And the biggest reason that they really relied on was, well, she will never learn to read. And as she goes forward in her education, she'll become more isolated and more separate and alone. And I thought they're using that same, it's like, but okay, there's evidence that she won't read, right? And I did not really push on that at the time, but put a pin in that for a minute. And they were very well-meaning educators are, my entire family. And if I don't like them, it's not because they're educators, right? I love them all. But I do know they were well-meaning. But the idea that because first of all, the concept that she might not be able to read would lead to isolation. When I think about that, it really does make me think back to this is just a way to separate and isolate, even though you're thinking that separation and isolation might be happening if you don't do that. It was a strange, convoluted way to look at that situation. But it did stick with me that was a big part of the case. There's evidence that individuals with Down syndrome will not be able to read. Okay. So I thought, I have to change the law. This has to be, I want to move to a different situation, right? Um, I had seen over time so many of the same situations and the same cases that I had started after 10 years of practicing law, that I started to think, I want to change this at a systems level. There has to be a better fix than lots of legal fees, lots of conflict, right? That is a challenge in the system. And so I left and I worked in federal policy, and I thought, where can I go? Where do you think they do this? I know this one group my mom used to be a part of. And I literally jumped on the website and they had a job open for a lobbyist. I thought, oh my God, I'm going to do that. But I thought, there's no way they'll hire me. This is insane. I'm living in Arizona, the job's in DC, like whatever. And in fact, it worked out and they did hire, and it was amazing. And it was a wonderful experience and an eye-opening experience. So I spent several years working on federal policy there and working very closely with researchers and educators and everybody at every level. And it was fantastic learning experience from those incredible, dedicated experts, clearly purpose-driven experts. And then I had an opportunity to go where I met Janet, to the National Center for Learning Disabilities, which is a disability justice and rights organization, an advocacy organization for individuals with specific learning disabilities, and really taking more of the family emphasis, right? A much more, also educator, but families are a very important part of that. And so given my experience watching separation, isolation, I really worked with the community and was excited to be a part of pushing for inclusion. And the federal law over those years did increase physical inclusion in schools, like physical inclusion in classrooms, children in the same classrooms, right? This chart, which you probably can't read, shows kind of how 80% or more of time is actually spent in. So the federal government started to incentivize this, and we pushed for all these ways for them to incentivize public schools to place children in the same classroom so that we would decrease stigma. And basically, over those years, that happened in large part. It did happen that kids became more, they were taught more together. And today, in fact, what this shows is if you're a student with a specific learning disability, you are included in a classroom typically almost up to 90% of your day, in many cases 100% of your day. And that goes kind of down as you get more significant disabilities. But it's still far higher than it was. What isn't there are the resources to support meaningful inclusion in the way that I would have hoped at that time in all of our work that they would be. And I think it's important to just think quickly. This is a challenging slide to put together because it's what I'm trying to show here is just, if you think about this, in 2001, No Child Left Behind passed, and many people just think of the word testing. That's really what we think of, right? Oh my God, all of a sudden they've started testing. That was actually pretty influential for children with disabilities because including them in the testing system meant, for the first time, someone had to teach them the general curriculum. Someone couldn't put them on a school bus on the day of the test and put them on a field trip or take them on a field trip, which had been happening regularly in most districts. And so that did create some good change, regardless of how we feel about the tests, about all of it. That did push the system in a good way where people were really grappling with, okay, how do we actually deliver this education in the general education classroom? There's plenty of other problems with No Child Left Behind, but that's a critical place where inclusion shaped important choices that schools began to have to make. And then in 2004, the last time we updated IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Act. And the main push there that people think about was discipline. The massive changes in the way that we were trying to understand behavior, disability, what caused it, what did it, why did this, and trying to put controls in place. Amazingly, the thing we also did then that everybody agreed on, we allowed, if parents and schools agreed to waive the 3-year reevaluation, they could do it. Little did we know that we would need the RISE Act because of that. It was like a big kumbaya win. Parents and schools came together and said, if you have had evaluations and you have dyslexia, we don't have to put you through the testing again in high school. Let's waive it. We know we're working with you and we're trying to get you on a path to college. Didn't think colleges will turn around and say, you can't walk in if you haven't been evaluated in the last 3 years. Well, you can walk in, but we won't believe that you have a disability unless you show us that paperwork. And that's what the RISE Act is trying to fix. So there's an example of federal policy trying to help everybody and then having this unintended consequence that we've been trying to sort of peel back ever since. And pushing to ESSA, 2015, I was very focused and worked really hard on what was No Child Left Behind became the Every Student Succeeds Act when it was reauthorized. I was very lucky to be in the room when it was signed by President Obama. But the funniest thing about that was when they print out the text of the law before anybody comes in, and it's enormous. It's like huge. But the second it's a room this size, right? Exactly this size in the old executive office building of the White House or like next to the White House. They brought that law in and there were like 30 photographers that just went right to the law and started just taking pictures of it. And it was like, it's online. It's already online. I don't know what you're doing. Like, why is that so great? Whatever. It was more went to take a picture of the law than went to say Obama's actually signing it. It was kind of amazing. But anyway, we really tried to fix some of the issues with testing without getting rid of it, but in that 2015 law, and tried to really say we're going to push resources to schools that need it. And I don't know, it's sort of out for what that is led to, and whether we've seen that come to fruition. So federal law, what I learned in working on it over that time, it is the absolute way to scale a change. It is the best way. It is a great tool for civil rights and inclusion. It is a long process, and if you make a mistake, it's very hard to undo it. So it's an interesting way to think about, if you want change in society, you need federal legislation, but boy, try to really think it through. Right? The founders were a little bit right on that one, maybe. I also learned a couple of other things, and this one was jarring. These are 2 quotes from actual conversations that I had. The first one was with a top Democrat disability staffer, like at the top level. They call it disability for a reason. Disabled, not abled. Like, we're only going to be able to do so much here. We've got a lot of other people to think about, right? And this is an incredible advocate, a well-meaning person, but it shows you how deep some of those mindsets kind of are, even in our very otherwise sort of liberal individuals. There are some real ingrained notions about a fixed identity that's normal and a fixed identity that's abnormal, which I think is the main thing we have to change. The next one I heard about 100 million times, right? Of course, not shocking, but how much will this cost and what's our return on investment? Which is that's not a bad thing to ask, I guess, right? You could be asking it, but it was constant. What is our return on investment? How can we measure it? And what was underlying that was a belief, again, in the fixed status of normal and abnormal. They won't change, right? So what's the return on investment? Because isn't it really just not able? Now, these are very hard things to hear, but to me, I think it's important to share them, especially in the family, because we're so far ahead of this in our minds, but we need to stay together because we are still fighting for real justice. And it's important to keep that in mind. I also learned that voices make a difference, really, really make a difference. Student voices, people's voices make the most difference, right? But parents also, and there's a chart that I want to show, and I don't know if you've been following the issues around the science of reading. That's been a debate in our nation for a million years, but recently has gotten even more traction. Lucy Calkins pulling back from her positioning. A lot of ways we're making some really interesting progress. I was working at NCLD during a time where parents, not with NCLD, I mean, we worked with them, but on their own in all of the green states in the nation. I don't know what happened in Idaho. I think it's been fixed since then, but in all of those states, parents banded together and passed laws to provide more services for dyslexia, screening. They're all different, those laws. They're state laws. The idea that parents are coming together and doing those weren't advocacy groups. There were groups, but honestly, this was an incredible change. This led to Elizabeth Hamlet's articles, if you've seen them on the science of reading. It basically led to Lucy Calkins having to retract what she had put forward. And that's amazing. Like, advocacy matters. You can't stop and you can't get disaffected. You cannot do that because it does work, especially at the state level. I think I also really learned that stigma makes everything worse, right? Everything. And we know, because of the design flaw in the education system for individuals who think differently, who are neurodiverse, they experience secondary mental health issues that I will argue, until someone can prove me wrong, are being entirely caused by the design flaw in the system. And so if you want to prove it wrong, please go ahead, right? But that is something we can change if we choose to change it, right? And so I don't know who said it, probably lots of people, but we are making a choice if we don't change. What we don't change, we are choosing. And so when you think about return on investment, look at what we're spending on this, right? I don't have figures up, but you know what that's, look at what we're losing. We are not changing it, and we can. That's a design issue. And finally, for this legal chapter, we think we know more than we do. So you remember the case with the child with Down syndrome, and the educators assured me the evidence she will not read, right? Well, I was working at the Council for Exceptional Children, and this is a picture of Debbie Spees. At the time, she's a professor of learning disabilities at University of Virginia. At the time, she was the commissioner of NICSR, the National Special Education Research Center. She was directing all of the funding for special education research. And I'm sitting with her at dinner. We're having some wine. I'm like, hey, what's going on? What do you got cooking? What should I be thinking about? What can I talk about? Had to introduce her the next day, right? And I was like, what am I going to say? She's like, well, you know, we just funded this amazing study that shows how children with Down syndrome can read so much better than we thought they could. And I was like, what? Wait a minute, what? And she said, yeah, and this was in 2012 that we were having dinner at our CEC conference. And I thought, okay, tell me more about that. 2012. And she said, yeah, Chris Lemon from Vanderbilt has led this group of studies. And it's incredible. They've found all of these amazing ways to teach children with Down syndrome to read. A lot of them are the same techniques we use for dyslexia. And I'm just sitting there thinking, like, why did they say there was evidence? Was there evidence actually of that? I'm not even sure. But they were so sure, and they were so wrong. And I remember saying to Debbie, like, how did you just learn this? It's 2012. Like, why didn't we know it? And she was extremely candid. And she was like, I don't think anybody asked before. I don't think we funded it before. I don't think anybody asked on that big level. And I was like, how could that be true? But it was, right? And that's I felt like that was a huge life lesson of, wow, like maybe someone told people this, maybe what else do we not know, right? How can you experience that and think, why would there be a fixed normal and a fixed abnormal? That's ridiculous. So that brings me to the final part of our conversation and my current position, the power of design, the power of actually changing the systems themselves. I work for CAST. Our mission is to transform education systems until learning has no limits. And we're focused solely on education, inclusion, design, and belonging. How can we design environments, curriculum, teacher education, all of it, student advocacy, engagement, all of it for belonging and inclusion to maximize those things. And it's a gift to work somewhere where everybody walks in believing it's possible and just trying it. And it's just like incredible. And I want to share that. But as I said, one thing, right? This is a core concept of CAST. Variability is the norm. We currently act like it isn't. We act like there is a norm and everyone else. And so it's resulted in a classroom that's like, I have 30 students, if I'm lucky, right? I have 30 students in this classroom. Well, there's 5 with disabilities. So they'll go down the hall with Mrs. Jones. There's 10 who are English learners. They'll go down the hall with Mrs. Lopez. These 5 over here experience great trauma, have poverty, have other extenuating circumstances. Boy, they're gonna have to go with Mr. Nichols over here. I've got like 2 kids left. Who's in the room? What system can afford to do this, right? I've got specialists, I'm pulling everybody out. What's the return on that investment? I'm causing mental health issues from that design. I'm paying more, and I'm not, every minute a student is out of that room, they're not getting the access that we fought for with No Child Left Behind to the general ed curriculum. We're not even teaching them. These 2 kids are getting everything, right? So I really think the pandemic showed us a few things, but if we can change people's understanding of human knowledge and human understanding so that they just think variability is predictable. That is actually what you're going to see when you go in. Now, that doesn't make it any less daunting, right? We'll get to that in a minute. That is exhausting, actually. The concept of it might be very challenging, but variability is predictable, and we can design for it. And I think the other component of that is just making a basic commitment to the person is not the problem. The environment is the problem, right? So that's what about the environment is putting up barriers. And so CAST, through much work over many decades, developed along with others in the community, a framework called Universal Design for Learning. And the whole point of that framework is to help people understand and attack the situation and start to have a way to say, how will I serve 30 totally different kids? Because that's like extremely challenging to think of that. We're not training people to do it. We're not actually set up to do it in the school. There's not support internally. The thought of even doing it is overwhelming. Universal Design for Learning is based on these brain science principles, neuroscience principles of how our brains work. And we know more today about how brains work than we ever have. but nobody really knows it. I feel like I have a weird secret. I feel like I have all these secrets that I'm like, let's just tell everyone the secrets. That would make it much better, right? But these are, and there's guidelines that go with them. And the point of them is just getting people to start to attack that problem, see and find barriers in the environment that they don't naturally see. And whoops. Did it go forward? I think I've stopped. Now there's a barrier here. Okay. So another component that is core to the concept of this that you just have to believe, we are trying to get people to believe, is that if we design for the so-called margins, we actually help everyone. And this is sort of final part of the mindset. It's not a play, it's a persuasive argument. I feel like I'm trying to make. It's a persuasive argument. We are all using technology right now that was not designed for us. Yet they let us use it anyway. And it's so nice of them, right? Everybody has a phone, probably. Maybe you are a holdout, you're a Luddite, you're like, I'm not getting a phone. But I'm assuming you have phones, right? You are using Siri, you're texting in your car, you're using speech to text all the time. It wasn't designed for you, right? But it helps you a lot. And if they took it away, you'd be pretty mad probably, right? If they all of a sudden said, no, we don't have enough to go around, it only goes to the people who need it. Be like, why? How will I drive safely, right? Additionally, I have a question for you. Another thing, who do you think is the biggest consumer, which demographic group, which generation is the biggest consumer of captions when they're watching things, TikTok, or they're watching Netflix or whatever? Who's the biggest consumer? Oh, interesting. Seniors. No, actually. Gen Z. Is that so shocking? I know, right? I love the title of this slide. The youth loves subtitles. Like, oh, Gen Z off the charts because they're looking at two screens, because a lot of them like it, right? There are so many baby boomers, Gen X, right, that we're using it. We're a little more, maybe not, I don't know, but we're a little clunky with it. Some people have confessed, right? The subtitles are bothering me. But I know that my 15-year-old kid is like using them all the time. And interestingly, Netflix in 2011 was sued by several deaf advocacy groups because they were not putting subtitles on everything. They were terrible, they were wrong, and they weren't putting enough emphasis. And so there was a big push, and they fought it. They didn't want to do it. Now they are leaning in because their own data is telling them the world has changed. These were not designed for Gen Z to use it. Nobody thought of this use, but they're using them. And now Netflix is doing amazing things. If you've watched Stranger Things, you see incredibly flowery language, right? They're leaning into this and saying, how can we make that really fun and really cool? And I think there's sort of this example, right? The OG example of curb cuts, which is like at the end of the street, you can ride your bike nicely over them, you can push your stroller, you can drag your luggage, but they're made for people who roll, right? People who roll around. That is who those are for. If they said to you, don't get out of the curb cut, you cannot use it, right? You would be like, why? And yet if they said we have to spend all this money to make curb cuts, you'd be like, how will that benefit me? Yeah, it's like we have to have a bigger frame on that. And so I would just leave you with kind of that where we began, right? It's difficult right now. I know that teachers feel overwhelmed when they think about it. Students feel overwhelmed. There is a way forward through that. And I think it's natural that it feels difficult because everything's difficult before it's easy. But it doesn't mean it's not worth it, right? We have Siri, we have speech to text, we have all those things that benefit everyone. And so I love this quote, do not stop thinking of life as an adventure because you have no security unless you can live bravely, excitingly, and imaginatively. And let's choose to live that way, right? And make the change we want to see. So thank you for having me here. Join us at CAS. Yes, and I'm happy to take any questions or not. Yes, and the index, if you have index.
Thank you so much. I'm Janet Sauer. I'm a professor here in special education in the undergraduate program. And I just want to say thank you, Lindsay, for your talk. I see some students of mine here who have familiarized themselves already with CAST and the Universal Design for Learning principles, which we're going to be making use of in teacher preparation.
Awesome.
So thank you. So I know people are going to offer some questions and writing, and I think they're going to collect them. But if I might, I have written some down here to get us started. So one of the things you talked about was, or you asked the question that you learned from in your own childhood experience, which many of us fall back on our own childhood experiences. And you asked the question, who isn't here? And I think that's one of the most powerful questions that we often ask ourselves in many contexts. Who isn't here? I think that's a powerful question. So I wonder if you might ask that question in terms of higher education and access with regard to who isn't here. And I know it's changed over time, but in your trajectory of working now increasingly with institutes of higher education like ours, when we ask ourselves who isn't here, we've done some outreach to try and provide access to a broader pool of students and staff and faculty. And maybe you just want to provide us with some examples, if you can think of some, about how we might provide greater access in institutes of higher ed for the people who aren't traditionally here in our institutes of higher ed.
Wow. I'm glad you gave me both softball to start with. Thanks, Janet. I'm just kidding. I'm totally kidding. No, I'm totally kidding. I actually think first of all, I think Lesley already is a very welcoming environment and has so many examples of inclusion in all parts. I'm very excited to hear about the teacher preparation program in incorporating universal design for learning. But I think one of the key things is accessibility. Is it an environment, and I would say this beyond Lesley because I don't know exactly, right? But in general, is the environment accessible? Are they committed to helping me access and understand the resources that are here? So one of the biggest issues I dealt with at NCLD, such a tiny thing in some ways, you would think, but it was lots of professors, college professors like to use PDFs that are not compatible with screen readers. And it's like, if you want to be welcoming, be welcoming. Like, you can say you're welcoming and then you don't do something like that, but you've got everybody handing out tons of PDFs. I wouldn't feel safe in that environment, maybe, right? So I think there's a simple thing, although I will say I think accessibility in general it takes a commitment. It is expensive, right? It's difficult before it gets easy. But when you think about how many students in your classes might take advantage of that, if you made that available to everybody, and how you might see learning outcomes go up, I would if I was in higher ed, I would be leaning into some of those core concepts that show you have an authentic belief that you do want to create an environment that's belonging for all, that's safe.
Yeah, I think if I might, because I brought it up this heavy way, but one of the things that I'm not sure if everyone knows that we have increasingly offered opportunities for us who are teaching using the platform Blackboard, and we have the Ally system now, and we have workshops in which, so my tech colleagues here are probably saying, you all know that, right? But the practice,
Yeah.
as an educator, I too fall into habits. We fall into habits, and we see the world from our own experiences. And so we need each other, I think, to call each other in and out, to remind ourselves, our students, I see some, they're not shy to remind us that we need to make our materials more accessible, always. Yeah. So that's a perfect example. It's an everyday thing that we can adopt in our practices, and not just in teaching, in all of our practices. And when we offer workshops and things like that, we can think about accessibility more. Right?
Yeah. I would say I think the university communities are leading the way in many areas of civil rights, right? They're leading the way for LGBTQ community, right? There is a lot of good work going on with communities of color, right? The disability movement has a lot to learn from that and to bring intersectionality in more. But I would say if you are there's got to be allies in universities who are very committed to those issues, and if they're really committed to justice, right? They're committed to, there is no justice for all of us if there isn't for one of us. And to me, if you are keeping someone out and it's such a visible barrier, that should be a natural community that would stand up and say, let's do this. But I don't know, I think my experience, not with Lesley, actually my experience in higher ed in general has been that is a challenge because of issues around honestly, I think just the structure that most professors based on content knowledge, and they're not they don't have pedagogy, they don't have training in that. And so I think, but it should be a justice issue because it's an access issue. I mean, it's actually illegal if you had, I mean, nobody, there's been many people who have tried to sue about it and all this stuff, but.
The law background.
The law.
Here we go again. Okay, and I don't know if you have, here they are, okay. And folks, you're welcome to write your questions down for us, that'd be great. Okay, here's a question. How can non-teachers or people who are not specifically hired in the education field support the efforts that CAST works for? So that sounds to me like a community connection. And I would love to think about it in terms of voting, and we're coming up on voting, and think about accessibility issues around just general society, not just educational context. So let's hear what you have to say.
Well, I'd love to talk about, now you mentioned voting, so I want to actually mention something about that. But CAS, I will talk about this with CAS, because a portion of our work that I didn't focus on tonight is involving a lot of workforce issues, a lot of bringing UDL into makerspace environments and other ways to get at community and multi-gen learning that isn't happening in a traditional classroom. And so that's really exciting work, some around STEM. So I would highly recommend it come to talk with us and work with us on that. Voting. So that actually takes me to NCLD, because we did a lot of work at NCLD on voting. And I will say the District of Columbia has some incredible voting machines. So I would say if you are interested in that, I'm sure they're in Massachusetts. I haven't looked at that. Unfortunately, they're typically like one precinct in the state has it, right? And they're amazing. They raise to meet a wheelchair. They do all of these different things. They make the text big. It's read aloud. The technology exists for, frankly, all of us to have a much nicer voting experience. So we had them, they brought them in and showed them off to our young adults. That is a matter of people asking for those because it exists. So CAST isn't working on voting, I will say that. But there are other groups, and NCLD has a lot of information about that. If you're interested, you could just ask at your precinct because they're really, really cool. And Lesley could have them even, I bet the state would bring them in here and you could see them because they are trying to show them off, and it's cool. In Massachusetts, I mean, you guys are hoity-toity up here. I bet you got a bunch of those machines.
Here is a question about your suggestions or any specific strategies you might offer us to engage and continue engaging faculty or others who might be hesitant or uncomfortable, reluctant to embrace the UDL because of lack of time, fear of change, as we said, habits, and the quote here is, I've always done it this way. So change, promoting change.
Right, right. I mean, this is where I do think there's a mindset issue with that. And so there's a way to, there's a couple different things. There's a, I've always done it this way, this will cause me to do it, I don't have to learn it, and kind of bleeds into it seems overwhelming, how will I do it? And then I think there is just a mindset of, I'm not saying it out loud, but does it really, I'm kind of doing it, it doesn't really matter, it's kind of, is it really going to help, you know? I'd say a couple things that could happen. Making it, showing people, well, first, we'd love to partner with you on that. We have people who work in post-secondary and be happy to get those experts in here and would love to kind of think that through with you. But I think teaching it you are teaching it, I'm assuming, as a part, it's at least in a course, it's somewhere in your teacher curriculum. That could be an open door. You have people who are skilled in it to kind of dig in with your faculty and teach them kind of how to use that. Because some of it will be broken down by just starting to talk about it. And to me, it is part of the same question of, are you committed to justice? Which, you know, I use in the university context. I'm not sure I'd walk into a workplace and say that same thing, right? Because it's a different context. It would be a sort of a different way to approach that audience. But in a university audience, typically people are more focused on that. And, you know, so showing them, I would think you have people who know how to do it, show them the barriers. They may not know those, I'm certain they don't know those barriers are there. And ultimately, you're going to reach so many more students if you do it. And if that's truly your goal, right? And frankly, I would lean into your art program, your design program, which you were talking about. That's what a gem. They're thinking about user experience constantly. I would totally, that's all it is. It's cool. They could be leaders in it, right? And so just maybe entering it through those different they're like smaller ways in, bite-sized ways in. Because I really think once you go UDL, you don't go back.
Everyone benefits, right? There we go. How about one last question, unless there's any other more cards in the room? Do you need a card or no?
I wrote notes on my card. So.
Oh, you needed another card.
Yeah.
Because we need to provide greater access.
In the organizations that you worked in, how many self-advocates of people with disabilities were employed by those organizations?
Not enough.
Could we provide the question again?
Oh, yes. In the organizations I was working in, how many people had disabilities and were had themselves, I think is what you're asking, right? Yes. Not enough. Definitely more and more. There's sort of it depends on the law firm, nobody was out, right? Lots of people had attention issues, executive function, a lot of even there's a lot of people kind of hiding those disabilities. And that's something I should say across the board in all our organizations, even at NCLD, where we were the most, although CAST is extremely proactive about being a welcoming environment. And at NCLD, we worked really hard. It was still, I worked with someone for 2 years really closely at NCLD before she disclosed her disability to me. I bring that up only to say there is an issue there that we're all just trying to deal with. I mean, that shows you how deep it is. But I also think none of the places where I have worked, other than CAST, where I've been able to shape it a little bit, and CAST was doing it before I got there, I've only been there 8 months, have been focused, like CEC, we were not focused on that. We weren't trying to hire people actively. I don't think we were focused on, at that time, honestly, race either. We weren't focused on diversity of thought in the way that we should have been. But definitely more and more now. One thing I will say that's amazing to me is I worked with all the disability justice groups, right, and many other disability focused organizations. Not many of them make things accessible either. They actually have websites that are inaccessible. They have, and it's so shocking. So I've sort of taken that on at CAST to say, we can help you do this, right? You need, and they want more than anyone, right? And many of them do. But also at NCLD and now at CAST, I think this is largely because of the student voice movement. We formed the Young Adult Leadership Council, right? And 2 members of that council now sit on our board, on their board at NCLD. And that was a really important move for us. And the goal is to do that at CAST as well. So they're full board members. And that's important because, right? And I mean, you can't design something for someone and not involve them in it. At CAST, we focus on co-designing. But that's an area we have to grow in 110% for sure. It's a good question.
So I think that this question just ties into what you were just talking about CAST integrating intersectionality in the philosophy and the design process.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I know you and I got a chance to talk a little bit about that this afternoon, about how you're approaching design from an intersectional lens in the process of design. Is there something you want to say about that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot that I want to say about that in particular. So I think, so there is a real way that we're working on it with the guidelines. The current update of the guidelines is focused on intersectionality, on equity, in 2 major ways. First, a deep look at the research to determine how many scholars that we quote or that we are lifting up have disabilities, are people of color, have come from diverse environments, right? We're adding and we're taking a look at that research that underlines the guidelines to make sure it's truly informed by as broad a spectrum as it is. The second thing is we're updating the actual guidelines themselves in like the words of the guidelines themselves, based on focus groups and advisors. An important change that we're poised to make, we'll pilot it first and everything and all this, but is the term expert itself. So if you know UDL, we want you to be an expert learner. To me, and I think to those who put that in there, that means I know about myself, I know what I need, I know I can choose an environment that's going to help me maximize my learning. It's about me being an expert in my own learning. But that isn't the way everybody hears it. And it comes off as not collective, very hierarchical, and kind of off-putting. And so we've had some really intense discussions about, we really want to talk about learner agency, empowerment, understanding. And so we're working on changing the guidelines to also reflect a more intersectional view. The third thing, final thing I'll say is, and this happened, we worked hard on this at NCLD too, the disability field in general is heavily white, is not as integrated as it needs to be, doesn't work with civil rights groups, other traditional race-based civil rights groups, doesn't incorporate that voice. And so the team at CAST is overwhelmingly white. There are 60 employees. We have about, I should know the percentage. We have a certain percentage that are people of color. And we have overwhelming number of people from Harvard, this school, Harvard. God, I'm like, what is up with that? I've never even heard of that. No, just kidding. I'm like, we have to hire outside of Harvard people. But sorry, I'm airing a little of our dirty laundry. So we, coming into CAST, it was like very important to me in the interviews to say this: our team must look like our nation's classrooms, and until it does, we're failing. And so we're partnering with the National Equity Project to look at our systems and our processes to say, what are the barriers we don't see? Why aren't we hiring people of color? Why aren't we hiring from other universities? Why aren't we hiring people with disabilities at the same rate? Although we actually, that one we are a little bit more, we're much better on. So this is a problematic issue that is difficult before it gets easy, but it's important. And I think we're very committed to making sure that equity is not only reflected in the work, but in the organization itself.
A different question about noticing the, let's see, are there differences that you have noticed with education for younger students and older students with disabilities? So I think that's getting at any age differences that you in your work have noticed, and then I suppose older students meaning college level versus young children or early childhood or those who are learning to read with regard to learning disabilities.
I mean, I'm not an educator, so you just, nor am I a person, an individual with a disability, right? But from my viewpoint, I think the differences are where any child with a disability has a supportive, caring community and whatever version of family is outside of the school, where they have that support helping them because they spend a lot of time in an environment not designed for them, they do better. Whether that's that they're at whatever age. I don't know that we, I would love to say there's more acceptance, there's more self-advocacy. I think there is, but I think it's still really hidden. And I don't know that I think it's not systemic, any difference. I don't think age groups, I think it's really dependent right now on the support around a person and a community that supports them and makes them feel like they belong. And whether they're 3 years old or 15 or 20. I mean, kids who are, the middle school is terrible for everybody, right? That's just a yucky time of life, right? High school, like if you have a disability, you're still probably kind of a jerk when you're a teenager. I have a 15-year-old in my house who's kind of a jerk, right? Like that's a time of life that's challenging. But I think it's that way for everyone, you know, and they are experiencing that too. But I wish I saw some wave of empowerment, but I think it will come.
I think the last question I was going to bring up was about the family. You started with the family and then law and then design. And I think about how families can be involved in design.
Yeah.
So how have you responded to the family in the design question or challenge that we have?
Well, this is such a fun question because you guys have a maker space. And one of the most cool projects that we have going at CAST right now is a maker space in an affordable housing facility in Connecticut. And we have one in Houston, and the thing that's so cool about it is in the community center. And so it is multi-gen. So everybody in the family comes down to work in the maker space. And we're able to engage parents who probably also have disabilities, have been traditionally had trouble in school, right? Have been pushed out of schools, who aren't going to go into the school. They don't feel comfortable going into the school. But they are in this makerspace and they're learning about UDL, they're co-designing with their student. It is mind-blowing. So to me, that is our current direct way we're working with parents and families, and all, not just parents, but right, like every version of family, and we need to do more around that. And then because of my background at NCLD, it's a big push for me to expand our audience to families. We need to have more materials available for families. Are our partners. Families have to understand this. They will help us advocate to get it into schools. So we're doing our first parent-focused webinar and kind of learning series in January in the state of California, actually, as a pilot. But I'm hoping that one goes, we are able to expand that because there's such a critical part of the experience and everything.
I'd love to see more family engagement in universal design for learning.
Yeah.
I mean, you think about when we first got the iPads And a lot of us who advocated for children to have iPads for communication access or supports for learning, and they had to leave them at the school.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and some of them, this is their voice. And how could you not go home with your voice, right?
Right.
And vice versa, when some families had things and then the schools didn't use them.
Yeah.
Right? The children would be sent with the communication device or the materials, and the teachers didn't know how to use them, didn't know how to learn from the family. So I want to go to that conference when you start offering that. Good luck. Any last words? I want to say thank you so much
Thank you
for spending the afternoon with us. And I do believe we're welcoming people for a reception. So, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. I very much appreciate it.